us from, and a very warm welcome to the second Platform Leaders event. I am Petra Jung and I will be your host of today's webinar. Back in November last year, when we held the first event, our goal was to test the appetite for debate and, generally speaking, a platform, pun intended, for an exchange amongst participants of the vibrant global ecosystem of the platform economy. And effectively, that is you, practitioners, entrepreneurs, academics, policymakers, and innovators. And it is thanks to your interest, the lively discussions, and the great demand for follow-up that has brought us together. Still in digital format, sadly. However, this does allow us to welcome participants from over 50 countries today, which, if we are being honest, we would struggle to achieve if we were all in one room together. We are once again collaborating with Louise Plantin, the talented graphic illustrator who will be capturing our speakers in action throughout our webinar. This is also proof that we are doing everything here live. Nothing is pre-recorded or pre-edited. And last but not least, I would like to invite you to use the chat function, and I can see you doing this lovely and lively already. Submit your questions throughout the sessions. The team here will do the utmost best to surface them at the relevant point in the discussion. Now, let me move on to what's in store today. And I can, spoiler alert, it's going to be absolutely thrilling. We've got a stellar lineup of speakers giving us absolutely vital insights from resilience to regulation and the topic of talents throughout the platform economy. And it is my great pleasure to introduce Laure Reillier, co-founder and CEO of Launchworks & Co., who's going to get us started with an introduction, followed by a keynote conversation with Niklas Östberg, co-founder and CEO of Delivery Hero. Laure, over to you.
Thank you very much, Petra, and hi everyone. It's a pleasure to be here and super excited to welcome you to Platform Leaders. I can see in the chat so many people from so many places: Argentina, UK, Belgium, Bologna in Italy. Wow. Welcome, everyone. A lot has happened since our last event in November. The world of platforms doesn't stay still. Platforms like Airbnb, Deliveroo, Roblox, Coursera, Bumble are now all public companies following their IPOs. Policymakers have also been very busy writing new regulations. The European Union, for example, published its proposals for regulating platforms with the Digital Market Act and the Digital Services Act. And academics have been busy trying to evaluate the proposed changes. As Petra said, Platform Leaders brings together communities building the future of digital platforms. These are practitioners, and today we're going to hear from founders, entrepreneurs, advisors, and investors. We're also going to hear from policymakers, that's the politicians, the lawmakers, the regulators, the competition authorities, and academics, that's the educators and the researchers. Everyone of us brings a different perspective, and looking at the same problem through different lenses can help us find solutions. And this is really the mission of Platform Leaders as we train to build a community. So today we're going to hear about what it's like to build a platform from scratch. Our keynote is Niklas Osberg, the CEO of co-founder of Delivery Hero, the largest delivery platform in the world outside of China. We'll then move on to our panel on platform regulation, which is such an important topic right now. And we've tried to bring you the perspective of platform lawmakers, academics, and practitioners with MEP Stéphanie Yon-Courtin, Professor Annabel Gower from University of Surrey and Said Business School, Max Beverton-Palmer from the Tony Blair Institute, and Oliver Bethell from Google. And of course, digital platforms need talents. And so, because if you got the right people, then everything follows. So what are the key skills and capabilities needed? How to learn about platform and ecosystem management? These are some of the questions that our speakers will address. And so we've got Annemie, MD and COO of Innogy Innovation Hub, also former head of HR at eBay, PayPal and Skype, Peter Evans, who's the managing partner at the Platform Strategy Institute, Vina Moore, who's a headhunter at Russell Reynolds, and Olivier van Karster, who's the EU General Manager for StockX. All of them will share their experience as investors, academics, talent hunters, and practitioners. But actually, I'm very curious to find out from the audience, from you guys, what you are working on right now. And so we've got a poll for you. And Robin, if we could show the poll right now, that would be wonderful. So what would you say describes you best at the moment? Are you thinking about launching a platform? Are you scaling a platform? Are you working for an established company, interested in deploying or running platforms? Are you involved in writing the law and new regulations? Or are you researching, teaching, or studying the platform economy? If you could take a few seconds to answer, and then we are going to review the answers in real time. Interesting, that's pretty balanced actually mix in terms of people involved in launching, scaling, or running platforms, people involved in platform regulation, or people involved in researching and teaching platform economy. Very interesting. So thank you very much for that. So now, without any further ado, it's my great pleasure to welcome Niklas Osberg, the CEO and co-founder of Delivery Hero. So Niklas began his journey of building the world's leading local delivery platform back in Sweden in 2007 when he co-founded pizza.nu. Delivery Hero is the largest global platform for online food ordering outside of China, operating in more than 40 international markets, partnering with hundreds of thousands of local restaurants and processing up to 5 million orders a day. So hello, Niklas, and welcome to Platform Leaders.
Hi there, thanks for having me.
Thank you. So you've had an incredible ride at Delivery Hero, literally going from 0 to 100 orders per second at peak times in just a few years. So you've seen it all from launch to scaling and now managing a mature platform across many different countries and cultures. If you were to summarize the journey, what would you say as a founder were the key challenges in the early days? Because I'm pretty sure that it hasn't been easy every day. So what was the key challenges at the beginning? And then as you scale the business, how did that change over time? And now today as a mature platform?
Oh, I don't really know where to start. It's been an absolute roller coaster. Has been fantastic moments. There have been really hard moments. There have been sleepless nights. There have been fears and worries and all of that in a great mix. But I think overall it's been very good. I know you do things with people you share a path, you share a goal, you share an ambition, and you're on that journey. And it's like walking a steep mountain, and it's really tough. But if you do it with a good people, it's beautiful to get up there. Then, unfortunately, as an entrepreneur, you're never happy when you get up there. You always see a bigger mountain or a bigger challenge or a bigger adventure. And I know we've been particularly ambitious. We also knew that we want to drive this company to a very large scale, because we believe that only with scale, platform with scale can drive the profitability, or at least if you want to charge small fees rather than big fees. And in particular for our industry, with such a small margin, we knew that we had to get very big very quickly. So we had to grow faster than we could manage. So running faster than you can run, and that means that you add cost, which means you have to finance, and if you don't get the financing, you know that it's over. So I had many moments where I felt this is never going to work. And at the same time, you have to keep the shine up for all your employees and everyone around you and everyone who's supportive, that it will all be fine and good. But inside, you are tired and you're scared and you are unsure at moments. So it's been anything but easy, and there's been moments I would never want to live again, but overall it's also been an enormous amount of beautiful moment, and I'm super happy that I've done the path I've done, and I think we've come to a point where have a more stable team, more stable colleagues, better backing from all sort of ways, and my role has become a little bit more of a making sure that we stay together, setting out the vision, the strategy, and that is a little bit less solving urgent issues in the middle of the night. It's a little bit more plannable. You can go for a walk while thinking. So it has become a little bit more enjoyable, well, at least for most of the times. So I'm very happy with what I'm doing right now.
That's great. Now, Delivery Hero orchestrates an entire ecosystem with it's a multi-sided platform. So you've got the restaurants, you've got the riders, you've got obviously the clients, and needing their food as soon as possible, and you also have other partners. So how do you manage this central role and find the right balance between these various needs and wants, which sometimes are actually not aligned? And in particular, how do you ensure that the value is shared fairly between all of those participants?
Yeah, that a very good question. It's not easy. I should maybe have picked a different industry that has less stakeholders, because as you said, and we have, of course, the consumers, we have the riders, we have the shops or the restaurants, and everyone needs to be happy. The whole ecosystem needs to be happy. That means if customers, they will only order if it's not too expensive. And if it's too expensive, then restaurants won't be happy because they don't get orders, and riders won't be happy because they will have less work. And I don't know, riders needs to be happy, otherwise they will not come to work, and they will, I don't know, we need to cater for their happiness, and at the same time we need to make restaurants happy. So everyone needs to be happy there in that, and on top of that, we want to care for the climate. So we also need to be caring for society in this sense. So that means we kind of want to deliver things often by bike. Ideally, we want to improve packaging. We do all carbon offsetting for all packaging, all food or all delivery. That we're doing. So we also need to take care of that stakeholder base. So I think that is hard, because however you tweak it, there will always be someone feeling that, I'm getting enough? Is it too low? Is it too high? But I think overall, I think it works really well. I think our strategy has always been that we want to be very, very efficient, such that we can reach profitability through a very small margin. So therefore, I think we are aiming for 11% of the food value as a margin on the order. But from there, we have to pay marketing, technology. We have to pay all our 40,000 employees with that small margin, and we are not even there. So we have to get even more efficient to get there. So even if we did 8.6 million order the other day, and we average closer to 8 million per day, it's still not enough scale for us to get profitability on the margin that we charge. So, but then the question is, with the remaining 90% or so of what we're selling, like how is that allocated between all parties to make everyone happy? And that's surely not easy.
Do you have some specific governance rules in terms of how you allocate that value created between the participants? So I mean, how do you think about this?
Well, it also a little bit of market economy, and of course we have to step in if we feel like that market economy somehow wouldn't work. But of course, if we charge too much to restaurants, they will be unhappy and they will not be on the platform. Then our customers will not be happy. If we pay riders double the salary, then of course restaurants will be very unhappy, and so will consumers and also riders, because then there will be fewer riders who can work, because everyone won't want to be a rider, because you can make a double income. So then we'll have fewer riders being able to take part of that opportunity. So I think that's why it becomes a little bit of a market dynamic. And I think in general, as we're scaling so fast, and we need so many people joining, so in the end, the ones taking the loss, that's Delivery Hero. Despite the scale and the size, we're still highly loss-making, because we have to pay a lot to our riders. We have to be very nice to our restaurants. We have to care for our consumers and all stakeholders as well. So, and we hope, of course, that eventually, if we can double or keep on doubling our business to even larger, that even under a small margin, we can make economics to work. But there is no tool that we say. Well, there are tools when we feel like if compensation for the riders, for example, would go below minimum wage, we will have a problem. We don't want to go, so we have to make sure that we significantly overpay or pay significantly more. Otherwise, we don't get rider. But even if we would get rider for a lower pay, that is where the emotional and where we have to look ourselves in the mirror and feel happy and feeling that we're building something sustainable.
Sure.
But beyond that, there's restaurants and riders.
Sure. So let's talk about COVID briefly, because COVID has had a massive impact on restaurants and some shops as well, because they had to close their physical locations for months. So how have you managed to help restaurants during that time, and what's been the impact of Delivery Hero on the community?
Yes, for us has been a little bit mixed. So Europe, of course, there was been certain lockdowns and a lot of shops and restaurants really came for asking for our help. And we've done a lot of initiatives to help there. We waived a lot of fees so that restaurant shops can come on board. We waived also delivery fees and other things to making sure they can get orders. We did certain special promotions to get orders, and in general, we felt like that's what they need. If there's something they need, then it's actually more business, and that's something we're good at, obviously, to help them drive that business. So that's something that we have done, but we also done a lot of other help outside our community, giving away millions of food. We have been transporting medical devices and medicines and other things on a pro forma or pro bono basis. Then if you look at other regions, then there were complete curfews, and we couldn't even deliver in some of our largest markets. So we, of course, had no orders for a long time in markets like Kuwait and so on. And then in Asia, the impact hasn't really been there. So on a net basis, the impact overall for the group has not been so large as one would think, but in Europe has been a significant push. And I think the main change is probably that consumers have also realized, and their eyes have been opening up for the possibility of getting something delivered. That is food, but also groceries and other items. That the awareness of the service has definitely increased in the European area, at least.
So, I mean, the theme of the event is actually the future of digital platforms, and I'm curious, how do you see the future of Delivery Hero going forward? So you've talked about scale, but do you have plans for new services going forward as well?
Oh, we are an ambitious company. We have always ideas about new service and how we can make it better and for everyone. And that means additional services, things that we believe that customers would appreciate. There will also be ways of how can we further save money and make it better for the ecosystem, even be able to reduce margins even more and still get there. So there's a lot of things that we're working on, additional services, They could be to help restaurants with payments. They pay a lot of fees to Visa and MasterCard and other companies. And of course, we have size and scale, and those can be things that we can help them with. There will be things like buying into restaurants, that as a large unit of restaurants, we can help them reducing their cost for their items, such that they can have more margins. And it is, of course, an industry with operated very low margins in the first place. So if we can help them to further reduce and their help them with packaging, I don't know, both from an environmental point of view, but also that consumers ask for better packaging, more environmentally friendly. And here we can help sourcing, help setting up facilities for printing and developing these packaging, such that it can get cheaper packaging, but also better packaging for consumers and environment. So here, for example, they invest in Biolution. Then we have also looked, there are so many things that we have looked at, how we can help and how we can be supportive, both to consumers, additional services there, as well as to restaurants and also.
Are you also thinking of expanding the proposition to other businesses than restaurants? You know, I've read about the Q-commerce. Is it something that is also going to happen to be deployed in Europe?
Yeah, and we see there's a big value for doing so. So as customers start seeing that they can get certain things delivered, and they see the value of that, but unfortunately the infrastructure for that doesn't really allow it, at least not economically. So if you would have to do delivery from a large retail store, that the picking of the items takes too much, there are wrong locations, too far distance from the consumer, so the delivery distances are too long. The replenishment to the stores are not frequent enough, because then there would be, and it's catered for consumers going into the store. So therefore, we have done what within the quick commerce, we have built D-marts. So those are warehouses, central warehouses, with roughly 3,000 items or SKUs that customers can order from, that are very closely located to the customers, so shorter delivery distances, and they are tailored and more automated, such that we can reduce cost of actually picking and shipping these items to consumers. And by doing so, we can actually do delivery of items and still hopefully making a margin there that is economical also for us one day. So we have roughly 550 or so of those warehouses. Then and we also have those stores and shops, and I think that's important as well. We have 40,000 local shops who wants to sell online. So we give them the tools, we give them our logistic fleet and our visibility for them to stay alive. And I think that is a core, because if we don't enable stores to do both offline as well as online, I think they will also struggle, because consumers more and more order online. And if they cannot compete by doing delivery, they will not get in store enough. And you will have a problem with those stores surviving long term against other large e-commerce companies shipping from China into central warehouses and distribution. So therefore, it is something that is very close to my heart to help there, to making sure they can have both offline and online, and supporting them with the tools and services. And this is a business where I'm not even sure it will be even lower margins, but I'm very passionate about helping that local community. So that's one thing. Maybe with scale, we'll also get there economically.
That's great. So I think we only have a couple of minutes left. I've got so many more questions to ask you. Maybe I'll ask one that is linked to the next panel on regulation, because there's been lots of activity going on in that field. And we've seen in the UK, there's been a ruling from the from the Supreme Court, the highest court in the UK, back in March, where Uber has agreed to classify 70,000 of its UK workers as workers entitled to benefits. Now, Delivery Hero doesn't operate in the UK, but in your opinion, what's the risk of more countries to follow suit? And if so, what would be the impact on businesses like yours?
Yeah, so I think first of all, we have to keep in mind that how logistic happens today is often that the restaurant themselves will have someone delivering for them, usually, generically speaking, usually uninsured and without safety and security and so on. So I think the fact that we actually, with our efficiency, we can pay more, we can pay better, we can give a certain security and safety. But I think that the largest value we can give to riders is that we can give flexibility. So there is a large part of the population who wants to have the flexibility of picking up kids during the day, or maybe they study on the side, or maybe they lost a job and quickly want to have an alternative to fall back on for a time. So I think the largest value we can give is flexibility. The other value that the riders want to have is the maximizing the payment. They want to have, of course, as much as possible. So we have to build a system that is, I believe, that is the most effective and efficient for the ecosystem. That means otherwise it will be too expensive for restaurants, or it becomes too expensive for consumers. And if one of those doesn't work, then there's also no riders in the end that works out. So we have to make it efficient. And I think currently legislation or regulation doesn't fully. It's a little bit contradictory here, because I think the best solution is still to keep that flexibility, keep what they want, which is most wants to be freelance. But if we can give additional safety, security, and pensions, or if legislation could allow platforms to actually contribute, or the riders would have to contribute to this, I think that would be the best of two worlds. The alternative is, of course, what we've done in Norway, where actually legislation has allowed us to have to rider to choose. So we don't decide for them, but they decide. Do they want to be freelance, or do they want to be employed? In most cases, they want to be freelance because they can make more money. But there's also some people who wants to be employed. So I think there is also a solution that can be found and can potentially work out in some markets. But I think we definitely have to be smart and find what is actually optimized. And I think if we can give flexibility and we can maximize pay and keep also restaurants happy in this ecosystem, I think that's where we should start for. So I don't have all the solutions, but I really hope that it can be a constructive dialogue, getting to the optimal setup. We surely want to make the better we can make the lives of the riders, the better we will flourish. So.
Well, excellent. I mean, thank you. That was a fascinating conversation, Niklas. I thank you so much for being so open and candid with us. And I'm now going to hand over to Petra. Thank you again, Niklas.
Thank you very, very much. Thank you.
Petra, over to you.
Well, thank you, Niklas and Laure, for a fascinating, insightful and very open talk about Delivery Hero and the journey from an idea to what today is a thriving global platform. An awful lot to take away there. Now, I am taking you on a journey, and let's change gears a little. Allow me to introduce our next panel about the emergence of platform regulation. Hand in hand with the growing success of platform businesses comes an ever-growing demand for regulation. And as a backdrop for this panel, our moderator, Max Beverton-Palmer, Director of the Internet Policy Unit at the Tony Blair Institute, will walk us through the top findings of a recent study where he's contrasting people's perception of existing regulation of key industries, and that obviously includes social media, and how people think those industries should be regulated. This will no doubt spark an interesting conversation with his fellow panelists. And before I twist my tongue even more, Max, over to you.
Hi, Petra. Thank you for that introduction and welcome everybody to this panel on platform regulation. So as Petra said, I'm Max Beverton-Palmer. I'm Director of the Internet Policy Unit at the Tony Blair Institute. So we're a not-for-profit that's set up to support leaders and governments around the world to build inclusive, prosperous, open, progressive societies. And we in the tech team at the Institute believe that the tech revolution is the central challenge of our time, and that the change makers in our society, the platform leaders, the platform experts who are really changing our world at the moment, need to have a better dialogue and conversation with those making the laws. And thankfully, we have an excellent panel coming up, experts from across this tech policy discussion. And I'll introduce them after my short presentation on some research we did last year. So if you're like me, you probably go to dinner parties or you go to Zoom dinner parties now, and all you discuss is platform regulation or the Digital Services Act or the Digital Markets Act or the Furman Review. But obviously a lot of people aren't like us as platform experts, but that's not to say they don't still have a view on whether these companies, these kind of platforms, should be regulated or not. So I'm going to share with you a study of a work we did last year of 25 countries survey on globalization and globalism, where we asked some specific questions around tech regulation. So this was a collaboration that the Institute had with YouGov. As I said, 25 countries around the world, a study over, it's a survey, online survey between July and August. And we found some really interesting things when we asked people about what they thought industries were regulated, how they're regulated today, and how they should be regulated in the future. So we asked we asked people to put certain industries on a spectrum of whether they should be wholly run by the government or all the way down to whether there should be no specific regulation, and then we can compare those. Social media and online search are proxies for the platform economy here. Maybe not perfect proxies, but I think they still give us a good indication of where people perceive regulation should be around the world. And so I want to show you a bit about kind of what people thought about regulation of social media. I think you can see, interesting for me, people in Britain and the US had a particularly strong preference for regulation of social media. So this is people who answered whether that there should be regulation of social media rather than no, or they didn't know. I think in general, people were fairly uncertain about the regulatory futures they wanted to see. And looking across a kind of range of industries as well, people in Britain, the US, France and Germany, people in Britain were much more interventionist than other countries on a range of industries. I'm not going to go through each of these countries in detail, and we could have a fascinating discussion on Nigeria's social media law, for example, and what that says about consumers' perceptions of whether there should be social media regulation. On the other side, on online search, what I've got here for you is a slide showing people's preference for when people answered that there should be no specific regulation of online search. Again, kind of Japan, its history of kind of liberal markets, has a much lower, a much kind of more support for no regulation. And again, I think we see this throughout the study. People in Britain in particular were highly supportive of regulation of the platform economy. One of these, this is a very complicated chart, but what this allows you to do as an example is to give you a bit of a kind of regulatory fingerprint of where people might perceive regulation to be, and then where it should be in the future. And you can see the colored bars are where people think it is today, and the transparent outlined bars are where people think it should be tomorrow. And you can see more about this in our study and all of the methodology, which we'll share the link around with you later. But I think what you can start to see from this is that people have a different perceptions around the world of where regulation should be. But that we found that platform regulation is actually fairly unique as an industry, and people do perceive social media and online search as different from other industries. But the regulation, like this chart shows, and this next chart on the UK example, shows that regulation is probably a little out of kilter for where it should be, according to the public conception. So I guess in conclusion, and to kind of introduce the panel, I'd say that what our study shows is that this is a highly complex world where regulatory solutions aren't easy things to talk about and aren't easily understood. But what we can see from this is that then there's a need for better collaboration, better cooperation to find that regulatory sweet spot. And perhaps as this panel can start to discuss how we can better co-create as a society of platform leaders, of platform regulators and of politicians, how we can co-create better protections and regulations in the future. So with that, I will turn to our distinguished panel. I'll ask them each a question in turn and allow them to talk about where things are. And I think it was really interesting to see earlier the diversity of people we have. So we're not going to get too much into the detailed specific clauses in regulation, but I would ask you to put in questions in the chat as we go along. So first of all, to turn to Stéphanie Yon-Courtin, who is an MEP who has the inside track on some of the legislation and regulation coming out of Brussels. Stéphanie, you've got extensive experience of all of these issues, both currently as an MEP, but also at a national level. Can you give us an insight onto what the state of platform regulation, what the future of platform regulation looks like at the moment? What's going on in the European Parliament, and what are the key points of discussion at the moment?
Thank you, Max. Thank you for your invitation. And I'm very happy to be here to discuss this issue with familiar faces from other webinars on the DMA, and delighted to have so many people online from different countries, which definitely shows the global interest in this digital platform challenge. And I hope I'll be clear enough, because from what you rightly pointed out, Max, regulatory solutions aren't easily things to do and are not really easy to understand. So I hope I'll be understood and clear. Well, let me start by saying that I very much welcome the two proposals of the European Commission, on the DSA and DMA, the Digital Services Act and the Digital Markets Act. In my last annual report on competition policy, I was calling for, an ex-ante regulation for systemic platforms, given the identified loopholes of competition policy at digital age. The European Parliament has been vocal for ages on this issue, starting with the Google Shopping case 10 years ago. But now we'll focus more on the Digital Markets Act. The Digital Services Act is also a very important proposal because it aims to regulate online content moderation. DSA might be a more sensitive issue actually in the European Parliament, because it will have to strike the right balance between regulation, liability, consumer protection, and freedom of speech. So, and on some aspects such as transparency of algorithms, and both proposals, DMA and DSA, will improve the current situation to address the imbalances regarding relations between gatekeepers, platform, consumers, and business users. So on the DMA, Digital Markets Act, where do we stand at the European Parliament? That is the $1 million question you ask. Both proposals are cross-sectoral issues. The regulation of online platforms touches upon consumer protection in the internal market, competition, sector regulation, data protection, and intellectual property rights, and so on. So it's very cross-sectoral issue. So far, final decision on which committee within the European Parliament will be leading the file is still pending. It should be resolved by the end of this month, and we all agree that we need to get an agreement soon on the digital market. There is no time to waste, because in in this digital market, in the digital platform, time is of essence. At the same time, we should make sure that we design a future-proof, efficient instrument. Regulation is good, but it has to be enforced properly to be efficient. So this cannot be done in 2 weeks. As the Commission, European Commission, delayed twice the announcement of the proposal, the European Parliament takes the necessary time to ensure that relevant committees will be able to work on this crucial file and provide their input. And this is normal procedure, but I understand it could be seen as contradictory with the urgency of the upcoming regulation. The DMA, Digital Market Act, aimed to ensure contestability on online markets. The regulation has been drafted following past antitrust cases clearly identified, and we know that some practices, harm competition, so we should ban them before they could even happen and not having to go through 10 or 15 years procedure to close a case. Also, our European antitrust toolbox is very much effective. We are not definitely well equipped to keep pace with digital developments. And as we did in the telecom or energy sector, we are doing it now with digital platforms that have reached such a position that they are able to impose their own set of rules and to decide on who will get access to the market, who will not. In some way, they could be considered as essential facilities, and be treated as such. We are talking about a handful of companies, let's say around 10, the biggest ones, the ones we cannot avoid to operate online, whether you are a consumer or a business user. Only these companies will have the very strict rules applied to their behavior and practices. Some would like to scare decision lawmakers, saying that the DMA will prevent innovation. I don't think so. I think it will provide a level playing field for everyone and foster innovative services. As recalled, this regulation must be narrowed and will not jeopardize the whole digital ecosystem, but address only anti-competitive practices clearly identified. So this regulation does not come out of the blue. It comes after years of experience of antitrust procedures, case law, and fines, very heavy fines, demonstrating that they are not deterrent enough and remedies that are not always effective to restore competition. Within the Economic and Monetary Affairs Committee, where I'm Vice President, it will be a committee competent to work on competition. So I do hope it will have an important role to bring its expertise and ensure the smooth relationship between the DMA and the current competition rules. Within the Council of Ministers, actually under the presidency of Portugal, the Council and the ministers have already started their discussion within its working group on competition, and I really hope that we could have entered trilogues in first semester of 2022. And if I am being optimistic, let's hope for a final agreement of the DMA under the French presidency, which will be the next semester, first semester 2022. Most importantly, we need to get this regulation applied as soon as possible. Finally, we will make sure to move forward quickly on this regulation as there is room for improvement. In this regulation, there are many loopholes regarding the definitions, the thresholds, the fine-tuning of list of obligations and interdiction, the role of national competition authority, the time frames, and many other questions. I look forward to keep discussing with experts, industry, and consumer organization, and start working with all of you. And thank you, Max. We definitely see that regulatory is one solution, but it's not everything.
Great, thank you. That's an excellent summary of what's going on, hopefully very insightful for everybody on this session. So I'm going to now turn to Professor Annabel Gower, who has actually written a 150-page report for the European Parliament on online platforms. And what this report looks at is the effect of platforms on the economy and society. So Annabel, could you give us a summary of those 150 pages? What should we be learning from it? What is your expert view on the future of the platform regulation?
Thank you very much. Yes, And thank you for the organizers to this event. And thank you, Mrs. Stéphanie Yon-Courtin, for, I thought, this extremely helpful remarks. It's very hard to summarize a 150-page report, which itself was drafted on the basis of more than 400 references. I think the bibliography itself is 20 pages, but I'm going to try. So I've prepared 2 slides, and I hope I will also put in the chat the link to the report itself. And there is also a 4-page policy brief, which are all accessible from the European Parliament website for those who want to know more. So let me just share my screen, and please let me know if you see it well. Yes, Max? Yeah, good. Okay, so I said 2 slides, so this one doesn't count, okay? And so I'd like to start very quickly to say that, of course, we understand that platforms, online platforms, create a lot of value, and there are very different types of business models, very different type of online platforms, but they do have something in common, which is they facilitate transactions amongst very large number of users using the digital economy infrastructure, and they facilitate innovation in the sense that, just like using APIs and software developers kits, you have, for example, millions of developers that can build on top of innovation platforms such as Android or Apple iOS. And obviously, there are a lot of positive effects of platforms on consumers, on businesses, and competition and innovation. If they and the success of these platforms is a testimony to the fact that billions of individuals and businesses find them extremely helpful. Also, a lot of services are offered for free. In addition, the biggest online platforms invest significant amount of resources in R&D. Google, for example, invest about 15% of its revenue in R&D. In general, online platform firms invest about 3 times more than other firms in research and development, and that's all very good. And so I think it's important to remember that. Now, moving on to the negative effects on consumers, businesses, competition, and innovation, there's been increasing awareness of the centrality or the position of as bottlenecks of a very small number of platforms, which are sometimes called gatekeeper platforms in continental Europe, or platforms with strategic market status in the UK. So instances of abuse of dominance, instances of antitrust violations, questions around patterns of acquisitions, which have, but it is debated, which have perhaps in some cases led to the squashing of rivals and new entrants. The report, one of the unique aspects of this report is it's not just about antitrust and competition. It looks at also the effect on society, and in particular effect on work and employment. So I listened with a lot of interest Niklas talk earlier, and was very pleased to hear that delivery workers have a choice as to whether they're treated as contractors or employees, and because a lot of platforms actually systematically avoid regulation and avoid carrying the social cost that are traditionally reserved to employees. Of course, the positive aspect of this is that they can reduce their cost, but the negative is that someone has to pay for that cost, and there is a social cost associated with that in terms of precarity, in terms of the cost that is, or the risk that is shifted to the individual that performs the work, and that has consequences. So risk shifted to workers, also an ongoing surveillance and control of workers. So obviously everything has a positive and a negative. The digital technologies and connectivities facilitate the monitoring and the control of assets and human resources as well, without having them located inside the same location or even being part of the same firm. So what we see now is we've seen that online platforms can generate a lot of value, but we see the limits of some of that models. And so workers' ongoing surveillance and control, and lack of collective organization, and a lot of precarity. so there's also effect on societal risk. I'm not going to go into detail. We've all heard about risks around privacy, the thorny issue of online harms, very hard to regulate. What is legal in one country is not legal in another. Just think about, for example, saying something against religion. Are we going towards a surveillance society, which is what Jaron Lanier and in particular Shoshana Zuboff are complaining about? And what is the effect of fake news and polarization? So we know there are a lot of problematic effects there. The challenges in terms of regulation is that you see that none of these issues falls neatly within one body of regulation. Not everything can be solved by updating antitrust. Not everything can be solved by just looking at privacy rules. And you have limits of traditional antitrust, issues around data and accumulation of data involving violation of privacy and competition, but also in some cases a systematic avoidance of sectoral regulation in addition to illegal or sometimes harmful content. I will not go into the details of the policy options, just to say that the report proposes that regulation is built on the basis of positive principles that are pro-competitive, ensuring freedom of competition, strengthening competition rules for merger control, ensuring fairness of intermediation, sovereignty of decision-making. And so the report says that it is in favor of the DMA and the DSA. It says that it goes in the right direction. It proposes some punctual questions, and it highlights some possible problems in the way it is going to be implemented. And I would like very much to say that the devil will be in the detail about how it will be implemented. One particular suggestion is that instead of having a monolithic code of conduct that should be applied to all the gatekeepers platform, it would be a lot better to follow the UK route, to have codes of conduct that will be customized for each of those gatekeeper platforms, because where interoperability would make a lot of sense on some issues for one particular platform, it really wouldn't make sense for another. So because there are not going to be a large number of gatekeepers, it will be feasible and very important, I believe, to do so. Mrs. Yon-Courtin also mentioned the role earlier of national authorities. I think the current proposal doesn't really leave a lot of room for national authorities, but some of them have gone beyond. So I think it's important not to diminish the role of the national authorities. So just to summarize, and I will just just focus your attention on the right left corner here. I agree with what Mrs. Yon-Courtin have said and Max Beverton-Palmer. This is a very opportune moment where a new kind of dialogue has to happen between big tech platforms, regulators, and also other members within this community. I see this afternoon's panel in that direction. I was very pleased to see that there are people from all over, not only the world but different kinds of roles participating into this framework. There has to be this constructive dialogue between the DMA and DSA, the regulators and the big tech platforms, and more collaboration across silos. So I will stop here. I think I exceeded my time, but not bad going for 150 pages. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Annabelle. Again, a kind of really interesting presentation and insight into your work. There's a few themes I want to pick up on there in a minute on kind of pro-competition, on innovation, on cooperation and co-creation. But to live what you said as live this kind of live dialogue, I'm going to kind of introduce Oliver Bethell, who is head of competition EMEA at Google. So Oliver, I kind of want you to kind of give us some reflections on what's been said before, but I think when you might often come to these events and expect somebody for Google to say the traditional thing about kind of they don't want to see the DMA or DSA or against regulation, but you might have a different view. What are the positives of the new legislation, and how can we think more creatively about this whole process?
Thanks a lot, Max. Can you hear and see me? Okay, lucky you. Thank you very much for the opportunity. It's a pleasure to be here and to share the panel with such knowledgeable experts also. Yeah, I mean, you're quite right, Max. I mean, I think, and Stéphanie nodded to this in her remarks, I think the expectation is that big tech will tell you that there's no regulation needed. The current rules suffice, and anything that we're going to do is going to have a chilling effect. That's not my view, for sure. It's not the view of my team at Google or Google more generally, at the highest levels. I think there are a number of significant opportunities for Google in the new regulations that are being considered at various levels within Europe, but in the DMA, as we're talking about that today. I think there are real opportunities. I think there is some devil in the detail. I think there is some uncertainty as we go, but that shouldn't put us off. And there are places where we can be very creative. You know, I lived through the shopping case for those 10 years or so. And there are certainly places where one can derive efficiencies that are going to be beneficial to all stakeholders. So I think there are a number of big opportunities. I want to focus just on in my 5 minutes on 3 things that I think will be important to us. First of all, and this is a rather obvious point, forgive me, but the ability to make faster decisions, for me to give clearer advice earlier in the life cycle of a product. I mean, the nuts and bolts of my role is talking to engineers, talking to product designers, user interface designers, and helping them make quick decisions. And the clearer I can be, the earlier I can be in that process, the more effective I can be. And there are often multiple routes for us to take. It may not be, you know, the one terrible route or nothing. There may be lots of different shades of grey at different points in the process. So having greater clarity is going to be helpful. It will enable us to be more efficient, I believe, in the decision making. Just by way of illustration, last year we ran around 600,000 experiments at Google, and often those, increasingly, they're coming to my team. So the more clarity I have, the more of an ability I have to give clear advice, the better. I think that's in the interest of Google and its users and the partners that we work with, because oftentimes we're thinking about decisions of, you know, this will be a launch of a product that's going to be immediately visible to European consumers. There'll be partners within the ecosystem we want to work with. So being able to be fast is going to be advantageous to us. So we should lean into that opportunity, I believe. The second big opportunity is, to be quite frank, to dispel some myths. This is a debate. The public discourse around some of these issues often feels like it's on both sides, on all sides, led by a tweet. And I think we reduce the positions to slogans, and we kind of shout past one another often in these debates. And from my perspective, there's a real opportunity for Google if we can build the right kind of regulatory framework, the right kind of opportunities for dialogue to dispel some of those myths. We will have to change in some ways, but there will be places where the facts have been misrepresented, where I can provide greater clarity. I can bring engineers to a debate. I can bring executives to a debate to better understand what we're doing. I think that's a real opportunity. I've experienced it organically with the Commission over years in the cases that I've worked on with DG Comp, and I would love to see more of those kinds of opportunities for us to dispel myths. Finally, this takes place in a global context. Clearly, this debate, this is not Euro-specific. And I think it's a real opportunity for Europe. I'm biased, obviously, you can tell where I'm from. I'm married to a Finn. I'm very interested in this being used as an opportunity to model a practicable, sensible approach for the rest of the world. I really think it has that potential. I don't think that we'll necessarily align on all of the underlying values. They will vary, you know, across different jurisdictions. That's quite natural, I think, and normal. Some areas will be more complicated than others. Stéphanie nodded to the DSA in particular, some very interesting sort of issues there where the value systems may vary jurisdiction by jurisdiction somewhat. But there will be places, I believe, where, let's say, the functional aspects of what we can build can be exported. They can be flexible. They can be used in other environments. And it's a real opportunity for us. What in particular, or four things in particular, I see in the DMA that I think, if done properly, could be very useful for us globally. First of all, categorizing the different types of concerns. Being honest with ourselves that there are some things that we can say are always bad. We can identify that, prohibiting your partners from talking to a competition agency, right? That's clearly something you want to ban. There will be things that are so obviously bad that we want to ban them. But there will be things where we're uncertain. And I think that's fine. But I think we have to build a framework for assessing those things. That doesn't necessarily mean that we have to build out a 10-year, 15-year effects-based analysis, but we can there be creative. How do we deal with uncertainty? What kinds of discussions would we like to have happen between the agencies and the companies? Who would we like to have consulted? What kinds of compliance organizations would we want to have within a company like Google? These are all kind of practical questions that I think we should wrestle with. How do we accommodate boundary disputes? That's my sort of shorthand for a point that Annabelle made quite rightly, which is that the DMA deals with contestability, but I can find contestability as an expression, as a goal across multiple different types of legislation. How do we deal with those boundary disputes? I think that the European Union has been very adept at thinking about those kinds of issues, and again, is a sort of exportable attribute of what we could achieve there. Finally, just very quickly, remedies. I think this is perhaps a part of the DMA where we haven't talked much, but we could do more. I think we can think about using this process to think very seriously about what kinds of remedies, what kinds of solutions would we want to deploy more quickly in the digital space. I think there's work around choice screens, there's audits of the kinds of remedies that we've seen today that may well inform how we want to think about solutions in the future. Particularly if we're in areas where there's some uncertainty as to the nature of the harm, can we learn things in Europe that are going to be helpful when we think about remedies that we might want to deploy quickly, iteratively in Europe, and then think about exporting some of those models globally. So that's a very quick whistle-stop tour. Some ideas I have. I do think there are opportunities, and I think that companies such as ours should lean into them.
Thanks very much, Oliver. An interesting summary. I might come to you first, actually, for a question, which is there's a bit of a debate in the chat about, I guess, the pro-competitive nature of some of these new regulations, and everybody on all sides says they want to see kind of more competition, but what that means can be very different things to people. So if we think about Europe and the strength of the European platform economy, what do you see are the opportunities in this legislation to improve the overall ecosystem and to bring more European platforms into an environment where they can be profitable and serve consumers in new and interesting ways?
That's a good question. I think that, look, there are, as we work through, I think certainly there, as I said in my opening remarks there, I think there are going to be a set of things potentially where we may want to say to platforms such as Google that we just don't want this kind of thing to happen. It so manifestly raises a barrier to entry. You can see there's never going to be any reasonable justification for this particular act. So let's just get rid of those things. Let's clear that brushwood. We're familiar with that kind of distinction between ex ante, ex post in different areas of law. It seems quite sensible to think of the things that would have those attributes. Spoiler alert, I don't think there are a lot of things that are so obviously bad, typically bad, and definable as such that we want to put in that bucket. But I think that the concept of that bucket is quite sensible. As you move past that to areas of more uncertainty, and of course there will always be a spectrum, there will be some things where you'll want to ask Google one or two questions, and then very quickly you'll have made a decision one way or the other. There are things where you'll want to spend a few weeks thinking about an issue, and that I think it's important to bear that uncertainty spectrum in mind. None of these things really fits neatly into this Article 5, this is Article 6. There will be shades of grey, and then we have to draw distinctions somewhere, but there will always be shades of grey. But across those more uncertain concerns, there are measures that you can obviously sort of start to think about ramping up, commensurate with the nature of the concern and the evidence that you have to justify that concern. For example, if we do not understand how components in an integrated distribution network, for example, work together, and we have some concerns because they are all owned, all components within that network are owned by one company, or at least the principal products in that distribution network. Let's start by understanding what's going on, right? Let's make it very, very clear that that company has to explain to us to some degree, and maybe to the public to a lesser degree, depending on what's in that disclosure, how do these processes work? How do online auctions work? Right, what's the data? Let us understand how these things are operated. So I think there's a flavor of transparency that's already going to be helpful in a lot of areas. Ad tech is a key area, a key example in my experience, I think, at the moment, for where that would be helpful. Interoperability, data portability. moving away from transparency across the spectrum, there will be places clearly where we identify that there are entering or expanding entities who are going to bring contestability to the market, and there's something they really need. Let's think about what that would look like, right? What do those APIs need to look like? What are the costs to a company like Google to provide those kinds of APIs, that sort of data portability? And then you get to, the more extreme remedies. I don't think anyone should take these off the table per se. It seems sensible to have all of the options available as they are today to some extent under the perhaps longer process of an antitrust enforcement case. But there are stronger interventions. There are divestitures. There are all sorts of things that you can think at the more extreme end of the spectrum. And I think all of those measures properly deployed with the right kind of regulatory debate, regulatory dialogue leading to the ultimate decision, and all of the concomitant rights of appeal will create opportunities for Google, opportunities for new entrants.
Great, that's interesting. I might actually ask a very similar question, but from another perspective to Stéphanie Yon-Courtin. So there's an interesting question, Stéphanie, in the chat about, I guess when you talked about being pro-competition as well, but there's a risk with all of these proposals that the big players are able to adapt much easier than the smaller players. So in trying to be pro-competitive, you might actually end up creating more barriers to SMEs and new entrants. Could you reflect on that and say if you think that's a kind of true reflection or not?
Well, yeah, in fact, there are many interesting questions within the chat, and this is one of the very interesting one. What I've already said is that the proposal of the Commission so far is dedicated to address, the regulation to a handful of companies, namely the big techs. And the idea is just to open and to provide for a level playing field for any of the companies, including the SMEs, for which, the market is essential, but this big tech, because of their behavior, play and act as gatekeeper and prevent the other ones, like other businesses, SMEs and consumers, for entering the market. So the key element of this regulation, as I said earlier, is that we as co-legislators, the European Parliament and the Council of Ministers, are now working on the many loopholes and many amendments to bring to the current proposal of the Commission. And they are, of course, given the fast-moving markets in digital, there are many things to have in mind. And I think the key elements of this is, and I think Oliver and Annabelle, highlighted this very well, security and legal certainty, for any players in this market, and flexibility also of the regulation. We're going, it's a good step, this DMA, but it's not, in my view, it's not sufficient. For example, the Commission adopted a horizontal approach to have a flexible and future-proof instrument. But however, introducing an approach by business model could allow a more targeted approach and maybe regulation or remedies. For instance, how do you define an active user to reach the quantitative threshold? Depending on your business model, you cannot define them the same way. You have many markets within the digital one. So having to wait for delegated acts to know more is not particularly satisfactory in terms of legal process. So we have to make sure that we have clear rules and future-proof as well, given the fast-moving world. And again, it's not a regulation against companies. It's a regulation for all the companies to be able to compete online as they do offline.
Thank you. Yeah, that's it's a great summary, and I think the future-proof pro-competition piece of legislation is what we can all agree on. And I think that's actually what lots of countries around the world are looking at the moment. And Annabelle, if I turn to you, so we've got competition and antitrust being discussed in the US, the UK, and Europe, and you've got a unique insight into what we can learn from those different processes. What's the potential for global collaboration, and what are the risks if we end up with highly divergent regimes for multinational companies or any European company that wants to bring its platform to the rest of the world?
Yeah, well, look, I think that's a fantastically important question. I'm not really optimistic about a successful regulatory alignment between, you know, China, Europe, and the US. I just don't think it's going to happen. Obviously, you have different regions, you have different objectives. Obviously, I would say the US, Europe, and the UK are certainly more aligned, but in a way, the big online platforms, they are the most global aligned organization all across the world, right? So they are facing the difficulty of a misaligned regulatory regimes, right? What's really interesting is that these companies themselves are becoming, in a way, kind of regulators. They are private regulators. They are governors of their own ecosystems. And so in a relatively short period of time, historically, you've had these organizations which just in a blink of an eye, you know, I remember just 10, 20 years ago, startups, mavericks, young graduates coming out of university, you know, breaking havoc and disrupting industries. And then 20 years later, more powerful than many governments, society looks to them to sort out issues that they were not built to sort out. You know, and I do have a little bit, I do have an understanding when, you know, CEOs of those companies says, you know, I don't want to be the arbiter of truth. Obviously, that's not what was the plan. But some of these companies have been victim of their own success. That is, they've really, ahead of the pack, they have understood how to tap into the potential of the digital economy to create value in a particular way. And they're at the edge of this envelope. And therefore, we are all realizing now that these issues cannot be solved only by private regulators. And I think that's why I appreciate very much Oliver's nuanced stance on this, right? We need to move beyond this sort of manichaeist black and white, I'm right, you're wrong, sort of, you know, talking past each other. It's just too important. And therefore, there are some issues that are better left to be governed by democratically elected, you know, representative. And we do not live in a world where we have a world government. It's perhaps a good thing, right? So those issues that have to be better dealt with by elected representative, well, they're going to have to be addressed by the institutions, the political institutions that we have. There are issues around the scope of those institutions. You know, Brexit just showed us, you know, the scope of Europe, the interoperability issues between Ireland and the rest. These are the institutions that we have. Other issues, you know, will be better resolved within the governance system of these private companies. Mm. But what we are witnessing now is a shifting of the lines.
Yeah. I think that's a great way to end this panel, actually, to say that, I mean, we're all regulators now, and each player in this discussion has their own responsibilities, and we need to work together to make sure we create a framework that ultimately works better for consumers and citizens, and creates a more optimistic future. So I am optimistic about the strength of collaboration that is possible in this space. So thank you very much to Stéphanie Yon-Courtin, Annabel Gower, and Oliver Bethell for a very interesting discussion and panel. Back to you, Petra.
Thank you, Max, Stéphanie, Annabelle, and Oliver. You've made regulation so understandable, which is not a small feast. And it is definitely a topic that will remain in the limelight for some time to come still. So perhaps another follow-on chapter. Now, with our second panel of today, we're going to explore what is at the heart of every ecosystem. And I describe this as talent. And a talent is needed when we are driving platform businesses to success that they have already achieved to date. So, but when we look a little bit closer, there are subtle nuances in distribution, nature versus nurture, access to education, and how expectations and reality come to play. We are in extremely experienced hands in this field with Annemie, who will be moderating this panel. Annemie is the Managing Director and COO at Innogy Innovation Hub and founder of PurpleBeach, a people and innovation consultancy. Annemie has also a wealth of experience in identifying, recruiting and nurturing platform talents and led HR functions globally at eBay, PayPal and Skype. Annemie, I'm handing over to you and your fabulous panelists.
Thank you. Well, hello everyone, and very, very welcome to this conversation. And I'm much looking forward to be hearing today what Olivia, Vina and Peter have to say to us. I will introduce Olivia and Vina to you. And then Peter, you're going to get us going by sharing a few reflections, and I'd ask you to introduce yourself as part of that.
Sure.
Part of the session. But let me start with a quick introduction to two, what I call them, and they don't like it. It's no reflection on age, guys, but I'd like to introduce you to two veterans of digital and platforms, and they're Olivia and Vina. Olivia cut his teeth at the FT, then spent some time at eBay working on a variety of scaling related topics. He spent 6 years launching and growing Ancestry.com, then moved on to Telmix, which is a talent platform, and is now GM and VP International at StockX, which is described when we had a conversation earlier today, Olivia, as a new breed of e-commerce platform with a specific focus on Gen Z. And I think, you know, if we weren't having this talent conversation, I would have loved to hear even more about that. Vina, on to Vina. Vina has an amazing combination of lawyer, strategist, and talent partner. She had a phenomenal career at eBay, where her roles included, amongst others, leading IP globally for eBay Inc. And then she moved on to Russell Reynolds, where she advises on digital and product talent, change, trends. And as far as I'm concerned, she's really at the forefront of this digital and platform revolution. Peter, why don't I hand over to you for a few minutes? So Peter will give us a few things to reflect on. Please type your questions in the chat, and after Peter has said a few words, we'll start our conversation. Peter, over to you.
Sure. Thank you very much. It's a great opportunity. Thank you for the invitation to join this really great event today. Talk about all different dimensions of the platform landscape. So I actually have to give tribute to Annabel Gower. She's helped influence my thinking about platforms, and Annabelle and I, a number of years ago, did the first global survey of platforms, where we looked at platforms not only in the United States, in Europe, but also Africa and in Asia. And that really grounded my thinking about the diversity. There's so many different types of platforms in so many different parts of the world. It's a pretty exciting and interesting space. I currently am the managing partner of the Platform Strategy Institute, and work closely with Jeff Parker and Marshall Van Alstyne on all sorts of different projects related to platforms. And one of the areas that I've gotten quite interested in is around platform talent and platform education. So last year, we launched a global survey to better understand what companies are looking for with respect to platform talent. And we compiled a database of job postings, and we're able to collect 11,000 job postings. And so this is both from startups, established companies that are already platforms, and they're looking to either continue to grow or replace people who have left. And then you have incumbent companies that are interested in launching platform initiatives, and so they need the talent as well. So Petra, I think we have some slides. I was going to just jump through a few of those to set the context for our discussion. What I think is interesting is that we've reached a stage. The rise of platforms is they've been around since the 50s. Some people point to credit card companies, for example, and it depends. Even if you go back to marketplaces, some people attribute those as being platforms, but kind of the rise of digital platforms is really a phenomenon that's happened in the last 15 years or so. And the significance of platforms in our economies globally has really deepened. And so it's given rise to the need for a managerial class that actually runs these platforms. And so I call these platform professionals. And so these are people who are hired to actually do the key functions of running either an entire platform business or a component of a company's business that is a platform. So if you go to the next slide, I just want to distinguish this from the important significant focus on the gig workers or the freelancers. So this is really not about that group, which are the contributors to the platform, but rather the platform managers that are being hired and are key to the actual operations of the platform. And this, I'm borrowing here from Östberg, who's extremely well known in the management literature for his work on managers. And I've adapted to his model slightly to add the freelancers and gig workers, which weren't part of his original model. But the area that I want to focus in on are the executives, the technical, the middle line, and the operations. So if we go to the next slide. Yeah, so just in terms of context, and I'll just point out one I think important element of this is, we know that a lot of platforms find their start in the United States. And in fact, if you look at the top 100 platforms and look at their market capitalization, this is new data as of January this year, the top, the companies that are from the United States in the top 100 now constitute $9.8 trillion in market capitalization. Asia also has very large platforms. And if you aggregate those, you get to 4 trillion. The big, outlier here is Europe. And if you take just European platform companies, they only aggregate to 430 billion in market capitalization. So if you go to the next slide, this has significant implications for the employment picture, because if you look at those 100 largest platforms in Asia, you'll find that they employ 2.3 million people. And in the US, it's 1.7. But then you look at Europe and you find only 180,000. So that means that the talent pool, and not all of these are obviously platform professional managers, this is the entire workforce, but it just goes to show that there's an imbalance in the labor pool, right, that are associated with these platforms. And this is direct employment, not indirect employment. So if you counted that indirect employment, it'd obviously be much larger than that. But this is to point out that, European companies that are interested in growing their platform businesses just have a much smaller talent pool to draw from to hire. So I just wanted to flag that as an issue for Europe. Okay, next slide. So what are the key roles? I'll go through this very quickly. There's been a lot of focus in, the discussions around platforms, around platform technology, tons of discussion these days around platform data, and all of the interesting processes like the application of AI and what does that mean from the standpoint of platforms. So what I'm trying to do in this research is to elevate the important role of people, right? These platforms don't operate on their own. You need talented people to run them. So what are some of the key roles? As I mentioned, we did a survey of 11,000 job posting, and from that analysis, 6 key roles dropped out. You see postings for platform strategists, and so that's an interesting role. You see a lot of posts for platform product managers. So these are the people responsible for all the issues that are associated with running a platform product. And we have to realize that some companies run multiple platforms. So it's not just one company, one platform. You have some companies that have multiple platforms that they operate, and so they need multiple platform product managers as a consequence. Then you have a unique role, I think, for that are associated with platforms is this idea of an ecosystem manager. They come with all sorts of different titles. Sometimes they're called community organizers or head of community. But these are the folks that are responsible for the external ecosystem and creating value associated with that, and growing those communities and setting the engagement strategy, etc. So super interesting roles, and we see a lot of job postings around that. Then you have platform engineers. These are complicated technology stacks to run and operate. And so there's typically have engineering teams. And so there's quite a number of jobs associated with platform engineering. And then there's a new role that's emerging around platform data management. This isn't just the data scientists. This is the overall process of understanding how your data is collected, how it's managed internally, how it's shared potentially with third parties. And you get into deep discussions around APIs and things of that nature. But there's a lot of jobs actually being posted for platform data managers. And then finally, as our previous panel focused on, which is this regulatory landscape is changing and becoming more complex. And so you do see numbers of roles being posted around platform privacy and compliance and all those issues associated with management. You also see interesting roles around protection of the platform. As these platforms get very large, these companies obviously want to protect those platforms. And so you get roles for around platform trust and platform defense, which is an interesting title that Airbnb just posted recently. Okay, next slide. So this is just a very small example of the global scope of the jobs that are available. And I put in the chat box a link to, we try to keep updated on some of the interesting job posts that are out there. Right now we have a list of community jobs that are active, but just, this is just to show that this isn't just a US and Europe and Asia. There's platforms all over, right? And really interesting jobs that I think are exciting for new people or people who are interested in changing and growing their careers, is thinking of themselves as platform professionals and the type of opportunities that exist in this space. Okay, next, I think this is my last slide here. Yeah, so I wanted to do an estimate, how many of these jobs are available, and this is super rough, but I think it gives a kind of an estimate of the magnitude of the jobs. As I mentioned, if you take the top 100 companies, there are about 4.2 million people directly employed by those top 100 platforms. Now, that's a lot of people, right? And if we estimate, and I've looked around to see what percentage are managers, and most of the literature says that about 10% of the companies are in the managerial class. So that gives you 420,000. If we take just a third of those, which would be, strategically important for understanding how to run the platform as a platform, versus more functional roles where it doesn't really, they don't have to have that necessarily that platform expertise, you get down to 138,000. And then if we look at the churn rate, so how many of those people are out there, they need to be replaced, and we take a churn rate of 10%, that's 13,000 of the 100 companies. So that's the top 100 companies. An estimate is they're looking for about 14,000 people a year in key platform professional roles to run their operations. And if then we scale that broadly to startups and incumbents that are building platforms, here's this ballpark estimate of 40,000 job openings a year. So that's pretty significant. And as I pointed out earlier, for Europe, I think a challenge, and I'd be interested in the panelists' perspective on this, is just the number of people with experience running platforms in Europe is just less. And so as a consequence, that's another area where it becomes even more difficult to quickly establish and scale a platform in Europe. It's just that the talent doesn't exist. So anyway, I'd be interested in people's perspective on that. So with that, I'll let others take over and join the conversation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Peter. And I'm actually going to start with a reflection, and actually want to hear what Bina and Olivia have to say about it as well. In my experience, I think of the times that we work within Europe at some of these platform businesses that we all know about, and they were generally staffed by very international teams. So whilst potentially there might be, do you think there is a scarcity of talent in Europe? Probably yes. but what is the reality of actually who makes up these talent teams? So maybe if I start with Vina and then Olivia, right?
Yeah, of course. Thanks, Annemie. And that's a really good point. So in Europe, you know, if you look at one of the examples that you gave, Peter, so product leaders, for example, it is a narrower pool in Europe for sure. I think about 75% of product executives sit in the US. But you know, we work very globally. But I would say that if you look at that talent, the quality is extremely high for various reasons, because you've either had to fight to get ownership within a US headquartered organization, or you are managing multiple countries, multiple cultures, multiple payment systems, you know, to give an example. So in that sense, the sophistication at which you have to come at it, often with lower resources as well, is incredibly high. So I think, yes, there is a narrower pool here, but I think the quality is higher. And I would agree with Annemie's point that the teams are very international, and as they are kind of diverse, both in terms of background, and I mean background of career, but also background of, you know, birthplace, I guess, and education. I think they are in many ways, and they need to be better able to see around corners, is what I would say. And I think in Europe, organizations have to take ownership of being almost schools to develop this talent. And it's great to see all that, you know, I'm learning all of this about the education options that there are there. But, you know, I think it's up to, in the way that eBay, Google, Yahoo, you know, did in the past. I think even the smaller organizations coming up have to take that ownership for developing the talent.
Thank you. Olivia?
No, I think that's spot on. The talent pool in Europe has to become scrappy over time. It's had to, you know, sort of make space and make the case for the projects or the initiatives that it wants to drive. And I think that creates a lot of stamina, a lot of energy. I also think that, you know, and yes, I wince in being called a veteran, but there have been pretty large platform businesses established in Europe now for a while, and I'm always struck by the depth of the alumni networks that have kind of graduated from those platform networks, who've gone on to do sort of really interesting things. So I think the talent pool is actually pretty good these days. It's probably not anywhere near like sort of Bay Area type depth, if you like, but I wouldn't sort of beat us up too much about the talent pool available. There is, you know, definitely a new generation, as well as a sort of a more sort of vintage cohorts of platform experienced leaders out there.
And I think that type of speech, I'm going to come to you as well in a second, right? So I think what I love is Marina saying that maybe the challenge is let's build more of those top platform businesses in Europe. But then switching gears for a second to what do we actually define as platform talent? And I'm curious, because there's a direct question for you, Peter, but then I'm also interested, Olivia and Vina, on your reflection. So there was a question for you that says, can I assume the job title does not typically contain platform or ecosystem? And in consequence, you know, how does one measure this? So that is a direct question to you, Peter. And then Olivia and Vina, my question to you guys is, how do you define platform talent then, right? If it feels a little bit more vague. So Peter.
Sure. So this research project was sort of a probing exercise. There's really has not been any systematic look at platform talent. And so you have to start somewhere. And we wanted to see how many companies were out there looking for this platform talent. We're actually surprised at how many companies do use the word platform. That was the keyword that we used in the search. However, there's tremendous variation in the quality of the job descriptions. And the other thing that I think is interesting is some of the things they point to, I think, may be not qualities that we would consider essential to actually being successful in running a platform. So I think there's actually tremendous opportunity, and I would love to powwow with Annabelle and other scholars to think about this question of, can you define a leader in a platform to be separate from a leader in a what they sometimes call as a pipe company? Are the attributes of that leadership different? And I think, and based on some preliminary conversations, there are some key characteristics. One is this ability to orchestrate and facilitate and create value outside the boundaries of the firm. And so I think that's a key attribute. Another is just understanding the economics of a platform, you know, really deeply understanding network effects. What does that mean in all of its manifestations for pricing, for product design, for data collection, all of those types of things. And I think the numbers of people out there that really have a good foundation in that area is pretty small. And so I think there's just tremendous opportunity. And I think, you know, as I've heard the panelists mention that a lot of this is being put on the companies. So that actually gives an advantage to the incumbents because they already have this knowledge. And so they can share that quickly. And so I don't know, my view is the European Commission should spend a little bit more time focused on how to create the talent pools to drive the next generation of growth of platforms rather than this obsessive focus just on the regulation side. It's just, I think a more balanced policy discussion around that would be very healthy and good for Europe overall.
Yeah, and I think that definitely could be the subject of a whole nother event. But Olivia and Vina, what are your perspectives? I think Peter made some really valid points there, especially around the leadership topic, right? Platform versus not. But let's talk about how do you define platform talent, and maybe even if you could comment on platform leadership, because I think those two comments were really spot on. Vina, do you want to go?
Olivia, should I go first?
Yep.
So platform talent is really interesting, you know, as a term. I mean, let's step back a minute. You know, it's cross-function, it's cross-sector, it's, you know, cross-scale, it's cross-ambition. It can be growth, it can be transformation. This is not a talent pool that really sits easily into one bucket. It's pervasive, and as a colleague used earlier today, it's becoming increasingly omni-relevant, which I just love that word. And I think that's the reality. And I think when you look at platform talent, it's really hard, and rightly so, to put them in a box. It very much depends on where the company is, where it's looking to go next, what is the bench strength, what is missing, and, you know, as I said before, what do they need to help them see around corners. But there are, you know, if I had to look at 3 specific attributes that I don't think are unique to this talent, but I think become increasingly important to this kind of talent, it is the customer empathy piece. You know, it's critical in all leaders, as it, you know, all leaders should be wearing the customer on their shoulder. But I think in platform businesses, it becomes increasingly important. The second one is, I think this, and it's connected to it, but it's really this connected to the EQ point, but it's this ability to manage tensions, because you're talking about multiple stakeholders. When you're building a platform around a community or for a community, any decision that you make that may better the experience of one person is going to, in many cases, negatively impact the experience of someone else. So let's take the obvious example of a marketplace, as there's a few of us who've had experience at eBay. Something that you do to better protect buyers is going to put additional strain on sellers. So someone who has that ability to really manage the trade-offs and manage the tensions and think things through holistically is going to have a huge advantage in this organization. And I think the third quality that, you know, it's very important to test for in these leaders is curiosity. You can't be dogmatic even about how you view a customer, and I think that's something you said, Peter, and I completely agree. You have to be able to have a lens to the outside world. What is the world doing, as well as internally speaking to your stakeholders, speaking to those representing and speaking to your customers, and actually taking the time to speak to customers and really understand you can't come with a standard view, because platforms by their nature are evolved by the community, and you need to be there listening to that pulse in order to be successful.
Thanks, Vina. Olivia?
I think it's spot on. I'm thinking of platform talent as what I call digital plus. You have to have all the core ingredients of a digital skill set. You have to have this focus on the user experience that Vina mentioned, that sort of empathy. You have to have that. You have to have a test and learn mindset, being very analytical, think about acquisition, retention, all the good things that happen in the digital model. But on top of that, you have to, and I love the idea of sort of empathy and of managing tension, because you're creating an enabler for others to engage and transact. So you're really having that ecosystem you end up having responsibility for. So it's a really fascinating sort of higher degree sort of thought process around managing obviously the demand and the supply, but the matchmaking in the middle in all its guises, the product and experience aspects of it, the trust and safety and community aspects of it, the economics aspects of it. So the matchmaking is really at the heart of it. And so for me, that ecosystem's really, I'm observing around the teams I've dealt with, it's not uncommon that folks have actually a background in economics who go into it. And I think there's an interesting conversation to be had around, is economics as a science sufficiently engaging with platforms as a business model? Because a lot of what's happening in the economics world, I happen to have a degree in economics from many moons ago, is that there's a lot of relevance there. And the other component I will add, we mentioned network effects. When a platform takes off, it takes off like a rocket. So as well as all the things we've talked about, this sort of ability to handle hyperscale is also a really important aspect of a successful, particularly sort of platform leader, I'd say. What happens when things take off? Because when they take off, by nature, by definition, you're going to have this sort of exponential growth curve.
Right. And so I'm also keeping an eye on the chat. And I think there are 2 points that relate to this, right? So there is the need to have more talent, the need to educate the talent, but then also one of the questions, I think, Renzo, you hinted at it, which was this real, sometimes the HR or talent partners in an organization, because there isn't a wealth of them who've come through the platform journey, can't spot what good looks like, or the recruitment processes are quite different to what they need to be to really attract the right type of talent, that could work on platforms. We had another comment, which is quite often, though, entry into platform organizations difficult because experience is required, and particularly in Europe, I would say that's the case because, the pool is so small and we need to really get businesses up and running quickly. But what are some of your reflections on that? Peter, Vina, Olivia, on how we need to evolve potentially the talent acquisition process, because I think I've seen so many bad hires in this context. And whilst we might have 100 and how many did you say, 180,000, and the pool is very small, doesn't mean all 180,000 people are great just because they have somehow worked in the space. So maybe Peter, do you want to have a go at that question?
Sure. What's interesting is some companies have this idea that they just need to hire one person to drive their platform initiatives. And then everything is right, if they find that one person. But one of the things that came out in the survey that we did is that there are some companies that are doing what you might call programmatic platform hiring, is that they're hiring up to 60 people, maybe 70 people a year. And you can imagine just in, for example, open banking in the financial services space, if you're a large bank and you hire 1 or 2 platform people, if you think you're going to have an impact with that, that person is not going to be successful. So some companies like Refinitiv, which was bought by the London Stock Exchange recently, if you look at their hiring patterns over the last 4 years, they're hiring many, many, many people in the platform space. And they announce that they're looking for platform people, and they're putting them in all over the world, not just in Europe. There are hires in the US, hires in Latin America, hires in Singapore. So it's actually a global programmatic program. So I think the larger companies that are launching platform initiatives can't rely on just 1 or 2 hires. They really need to do this as a systematic process. The other thing that I think is interesting is that I have not seen too many, executive recruiting firms. They have digital practices, but I'm a little bit surprised that they haven't established dedicated platform offerings, because there's so many companies out there now looking for platform talent that it strikes me as a missed opportunity not to show that you have a dedicated focus in this area and you're building dedicated competency and can serve clients that are looking for that competency. And maybe I'm missing it, but I'm super interested to watch on the recruitment side, how they're evolving to serve the market.
Vina, thanks, Peter. Vina, I'm quite interested on your perspective in that regard.
Yeah, of course. So I think platform, I'd agree with what what was said earlier. It's kind of digital plus with some additional pieces involved in it. So as with the way that we're moving our technology practice, I would very much see platform talent as a horizontal because it sits across multiple sectors. You can't really have it as a vertical, and I think having it as a horizontal helps you almost in a platformy way, helps you really connect candidates with organizations and help that cross-pollination, because organizations are very aware, and increasingly so in my experience, they don't want someone who brings exactly the same thing. They're really looking to cross-pollinate, and if you think of it as a horizontal, it works better. And I think if recruiters don't have platform as a name for that particular horizontal, it's because I think platform is so complex in itself. There are multiple functions, so it's not like retail or industrial, because it's not a sector, and you can't even say it's the engineering practice because it's so much broader than that, but it kind of threads its way through a lot of it. And I think what organizations even want when they're looking at talent can just be so incredibly different, that we wouldn't want to lose the nuance by lumping everyone together into this one bucket. I think it loses some of the benefit of what you get, but I think it's a really interesting point.
Mike, I think, Vina, you're picking up on something interesting there, right? Because the one thing that I'm, in my experience, have also found, and it's again a nuance point, is that the cultures in all these different platform businesses are so different. And not only do you have to match skill set and experience, but more often than not, you have to find that excitement, that real passion, that matchmaking. And sometimes, certainly I've seen that really also is an added nuance or layer of complexity that comes into the mix.
No, absolutely.
So I'm just looking at the time. I think we only have like 3 minutes, and there've been so many comments and questions around education. Where can we learn and grow ourselves? What role should progressive platform companies themselves, or employers maybe play in this context? So what are your perspectives? In closing, how would you suggest, each of you, that we grow platform capabilities? Who should do it? Whose responsibility is it? And maybe even advice for where you can start. If as a business you want to grow those capabilities, or if you as an individual want to grow yourself. I'm just having a look if there's anything we want to, yeah, I think that's it. So Olivia, who had a shout out as a veteran, again in the chat, in message from Eindhoven.
Let's not mention the V word again. So I think anybody could be successful ultimately in a platform business. There are 3 key ingredients that I think have sort of bubbled up during this conversation. There needs to be intellectual curiosity and agility, for sure, because we generally talking about solving complex problems, multivariate problems. Ability to handle ambiguity, in my mind. I mean, that's a sort of goes almost like without saying in any digital environment. It's particularly the case. And the third one is combining this analytical and empathetic sort of skill set. I think sort of Vina called out really well. My advice to platforms, big or small, frankly, in terms of talent, is grow your own. I think the most important thing is there's not going to be a ready factory of sort of plug and play platform leaders, but find the high potential, future leaders who show some of those skills in spades, spot them, coach them, stretch them, because that is ultimately the best possible way to sort of, to scale the organization. Now, none of what I'm saying isn't true in any other industries and businesses anyway, but I think given the sort of the pace of change and the complexities, it's particularly important for platforms.
Thanks, Olivia. I'm going to add something on to the last 2 of you to comment on. So you got off lightly, Olivia. I saw a really interesting comment in the one of the questions as well, where it was asked how much of the platform success is a function of platform talent. So I guess, can you weave that into your closing remarks as well, Peter?
I think it's absolutely critical, right? You have to know how to assemble the technology. You have to know how to design your market strategy. And, I would just leave with saying that this notion of being a platform professional is a super exciting career opportunity. And there are a numbers of executive education courses of all ranges of prices, all the way up from more than $5,000 for a weekend to just $750 for a 3-week course. So what I'm seeing out there is that young people and mid-careers are actually assembling their own portfolio to demonstrate to the market that they have these capabilities. I'm just still stunned that no university has put together a minor or a major in platform management and strategy. I think it's a huge opportunity, and I think the universities are missing the boat. And so now is the time to strike, and Europe is a great place to launch that kind of initiative. There are courses available. I'm not saying that there aren't. It's just that if you're a young person and you're trying to demonstrate to potential hires that you've gone through the rigor of taking a program, and also for the school of the businesses to go and find where the pipeline talent is, it would be very useful for the universities to jump on board and to go beyond this broad digital capability, because this is a digital plus. And in fact, I think these are the most exciting roles in the company, because it's putting you at the forefront of the firm's strategy. And so I would just leave with saying that it's a super exciting career opportunity, and universities and the executive recruiting world need to focus on this and, provide services that meet the opportunity.
Thanks, Peter. Vina.
So I think 4 things really, and I'll weave in your kind of extra question as well, Annemie. So the first one I'd say is, focus on competencies and mindset just as much as you focus on experience with these leaders. That is critically important. Secondly, think of the bench strength. If you're talking about leadership team or whatever your team you're talking about, trying to think really carefully about filling the gaps. Don't hire what's worked in the past. I mean, you want to be evolving, you want to be moving forward. So fill the gaps, hire to fill gaps and add, not replicate. And thirdly, Olivier mentioned it, but it's such a good point that I think it's worth mentioning again. Be your own school. Develop your people, be a school, give them the education as they are working for you. And I think finally, on your point, Annemie, people are going to make or break platform businesses. It is the #1 asset in any organization, because you're servicing communities, you're not building widgets. It's more important than it is anywhere else. And I think in that context, diversity becomes more important than ever. Make sure you're hiring to represent the communities you're serving.
Great. And on that note, I wish we could have carried on for quite a lot longer, but we can't, unfortunately. So just it remains with me to say thank you very much, Vina, Peter, and Olivia. And yeah, let's see where this goes, and let's see if anybody heard Peter.
Thank you very much. It was a great panel. Really enjoyed it.
Right. Thank you. Petra, I think am I handing back to you?
You are. Thank you, Annemie, Vina, Olivier, and Peter. It was really fascinating. And I'm not just saying this. I was sitting here, groping to my chair. And especially also a big thank you for picking up so many questions from the audience, and very elegantly. I think you've got a very happy listener audience there. It's clear that talent really, really underpins the success of so many organizations in the ecosystem. And I'm absolutely certain that this is not the first or the last time that we've discussed this topic. I'm looking forward to successive rounds of many more interesting exchanges here. Now, as we are coming to the close of our webinar, Benoit Reillier, the CEO and co-founder of Launchworks & Co., is going to provide us with a rounded synopsis of today's discussions, by no means an easy task. I invite you to stay online for a couple more minutes after Benoit's closing remarks, so that you can enjoy Louise's fantastic captures. You've seen a few snippets already of all our speakers and the key themes, and I promise you, you will not be disappointed. Benoit, I'm handing over to you.
Thank you, Petra. So yes, I've got the difficult role of closing this event, and I'm going to try to summarize some of the key highlights of today, and pick some of the key insights from our speakers in less than 10 minutes or so. So the title of today's event was The Future of Digital Platforms, and that reminded me of an article that was written a long time ago now, 70 years ago, in the early 50s. And the article is a short interview titled The Future of Telephone. And it's the interview of a telephone and telegraph executive. And this executive is being asked about what he thinks of this new invention, the telephone. And the answers are very interesting. The executive says, I think this is going to be big. I think one day everybody will have a telephone. We may even end up with telephones that we carry with us, like a watch. And clearly, you can see in the article that the journalist is getting a little bit confused and probably not confident that this is going to happen. And then the executive goes even further and says, I think one day the telephone network can be used so that people can see each other when they speak. Clearly, that was prescient. Now, only a few years ago, when we set up Launchworks & Co., people would tell us that platforms were probably not going to be around for a long time, and that it could be a fad, and that they may not become something that will last, basically. Now, I think it's fair to say that no journalist is going to claim that platforms are not going to be important in the future. And we all expect digital platforms, be it marketplaces, payment platforms, app stores, to be important business models in the future. And this is happening fast. Now, we had lots of very rich discussions today, lots of different viewpoints, different lenses, talking about the same thing, but with a different perspective, which I think was very helpful, from the practitioners, the entrepreneurs who are building these platforms, to the academics who are trying to understand better these models and their impact on society, and of course the policymakers who have the difficult task of setting the rules of the game and the regulations for this emerging platform economy. So I have a soft spot for entrepreneurs. So it was very good to listen to Niklas Osberg in conversation with Laure Reillier at the beginning of the event, and the incredible journey to scale, start from scratch and scale a platform business. We work with lots of scaling businesses, and we know how hard and how difficult it is to go from zero to 100 transactions a second in the case of Delivery Hero. And platforms only work at scale, so you have to aspire for that journey, and you have to aspire for that growth, and you have to prove yourself at every financing round, is one thing that Niklas told us. He also talked about being tired and scared, and I think of sleepless nights. So this is a difficult journey. One thing that is very difficult is this balance that you need to strike in order to please all the stakeholders within your ecosystem. And it's incredibly difficult to balance these needs and wants of all the participants in a sustainable way. So that's really the core challenge for many established platform businesses. Now, platforms, of course, are very disruptive business models. They face lots of challenges, and many of the things that they struggle with have to do with the fact that a lot of the infrastructure, lots of the regulations currently in place have been designed for the Industrial Revolution and the traditional firm in the Industrial Revolution. So all the labor laws were designed for people that would work in a factory, probably full time, in many cases for the best part of their lives, at a given physical location. And clearly the future of work is going to be different, and we'll need to find ways to adapt these legislations to a more flexible future. So that led us to our regulation panel. So Max Beverton-Palmer, who is director at the Internet Policy Unit of the Tony Blair Institute, started by sharing some survey results that allowed us to compare and contrast what people expected from platform regulation and what their perceptions were of the existing regulations. And it was very interesting to compare and contrast different countries like the UK, the US. So Japan was an outlier in many of these results. But overall, there's an appetite, of course, for regulation, but for proportionate regulation. We need to find this sweet spot, as Max said. Now, Stéphanie Yon-Courtin told us about the DMA and the DSA, so these two bits of regulations that have been proposed by the Commission and are being discussed at the moment. And I can't remember who said, laws are like sausages. You should never watch them being made. But Stéphanie managed to give us some clear insights into this sometimes messy legislative process. And I'm hopeful that we will be able to produce some appetizing regulations. Now, I'm not sure how far I can take the sausage analogy, but basically, these are complex pieces of legislation that touch upon lots of areas, from free speech, consumer protection, IP rights, intellectual property, and this will take quite a while in order to crystallize. Really, I think the future-proof competition law framework that is being put in place will be fine-tuned for a while, and then we'll have more visibility probably under the French presidency, I understand, in 2022, before these regulations can start to be enforced. Now, Professor Annabel Gower, who has been working on the topic of platform for many years, talked about her recent report, and she gave us a very good summary. This is a very interesting report because it addresses a far-reaching set of issues. Usually reports focus on competition or labor laws, and this particular report is more holistic in its approach. I found some of the policy recommendations particularly interesting, especially those around principle-based regulation. At the moment, the DMA can be seen as quite a monolithic code of conduct, as Annabelle says, and you may find more flexible ways of distinguishing between the different contexts, the different platforms, gatekeepers, in order to have regulations that are based on code of conducts and that more fit for purpose. So that was an interesting suggestion to have the right institutional framework as well to enforce these legislations. Now, Oliver Bethell from Google gave us an interesting perspective from a large established platform, and stressed a number of opportunities actually that platforms see in the coming regulations. So it's not as antagonistic as some people may think. I mean, by providing more transparency, interoperability, and choice, platforms can also maximize the trust in the ecosystem. And I think developing these trusted, safe online environments, and this is a global problem, would be an objective where actually regulators, citizens, and platforms should be all aligned. So there's lots of things that can be done in that area. So I think we all agree regulation is an increasingly important topic for the platform economy, and it will remain so for many years to come. So getting this right will be critical. Then we moved on to the talents for the platform economy. And of course, platforms themselves need talent. They need increasingly what we call ecosystem level management capabilities. And we see this appetite for acquiring these skills when we teach or when we run workshop with leadership teams around the world, and clearly our contribution is just a drop in the ocean compared to the demand. So I wholeheartedly agree with Peter Evans when he says that there's real demand, that it's growing, and we need to design the training capabilities to meet that demand for platform skills and platform training. Now, Vina is not only ex-eBay, but she is a search executive, and she's looking for these talents. And she shared some very interesting things about the nature of these talents, and it's our experience as well. You may have a narrower pool of talent in Europe, but often of very high quality, and you need lots of talents at the moment for digital transformation to execute these platform strategies. And while it's difficult to find or put in the box the perfect platform leader, some of the key characteristics are about empathy to manage ecosystems, to understand shareholders, the ability to manage trade-offs within these various, amongst these various stakeholders within the ecosystems, and of course the curiosity to experiment. So Olivier, with himself, I know he doesn't like the term veteran, but he's an experienced platform leader who has honed his craft in a number of platform businesses. He's talking about the digital plus mindset, and I think that's a very insightful way to characterize the type of platform leaders that we increasingly need. And we need matching capabilities. We need platform economics understanding. We need people who understand trust architectures. So these new skills and capabilities are increasingly in demand. Now, Annemie, I'd like to thank Annemie, who had global responsibility for recruiting, training, nurturing many of these talents at eBay, PayPal, Skype, and now for clients in PurpleBeach and at innogy. And she masterfully moderated this panel, and she reminded us that skills are absolutely critical, but the culture is also a very interesting dimension, and you recruit for both, of course. So you need to make sure that the matching is right. So to conclude, there is a growing need for talents, for education, for coaching at all levels of organizations, and this gap is growing fast. It's certainly our experience at Launchworks. Now, I'd like to thank all my colleagues at Launchworks, and that includes Petra, of course, our master of ceremony for the day, Laure, co-chaired the event, but of course, lots of other people behind the scene who helped, Justin, Robin, Mia, Stéphanie, and I'm sure I'm forgetting a few people. And I'd like to thank the panelists and moderators for their contribution today as well. And we like to keep these events free. So I'd like to thank Google for sponsoring today's event as well. Finally, I'd like to thank you all the participants today. We had more than 500 people signed up. So thank you for joining us. Thank you for asking questions. I know it's difficult for our moderators to always address all the questions, but they're very helpful to us. So we read them all. We even try to answer some of them in post or articles on the website, so do come back. And they also inform the selection of future topics for other events. So thank you for that. We're building a community, so if you've got questions, suggestions, you want to get involved, feel free to get in touch. Now, lastly, I'd like to thank Louise Plantin, who has illustrated live the event. You may have seen some drawings from time to time in between panels or discussions. And Louise will you'll see the full version of our drawings just after my closing remarks. So thank you, Louise, and thank you all, and see you soon.